All right, so welcome back everyone to this sixth session of Water and Communications 2025. Water and Communication is supported by the Grundfos Foundation, so I really want to thank the Grundfos Foundation for making this program happen. It's been really cool to see the engagement in the chat, on the WhatsApp chat as well, in social media. So I really encourage you, if you have your experience to share on social media, please hashtag water in communications and water week and CWE, as many as you want. Yeah, share your experience with me as well via email or in the chat. I'm really curious to know what you get from that. And we'll have another opportunity for you to share your experience, which I'll get to you in a minute. As usual, the little logistics for today. Don't forget to turn on the interpretation, whichever language you want to hear it from, English, Spanish, or Arabic. We have interpreters today that allow us to communicate and hear each other in the language of our choice. So at the bottom of your screen, you will see the interpretation icon that's looks like a globe. It can also be located under More, so look for that and choose the language of your choice. And yeah, a quick reminder that the recordings are uploaded a few days after the session. We already have week 1 and week 2 ready in English, Spanish, and Arabic, so you can check this out. The recording from Tuesday will be uploaded in a few days, and the recording from today will be uploaded next week. We just need to edit in the interpretation tracks. That's why it takes a few days, but you will get all the recordings eventually. Another reminder as well that we have this Google Drive. It's an open drive where you'll find material from the sessions. So you will have the slides, the session summaries, which are taken from the chat. So if you have resources, comments, reflections, anything you want to share with other participants, make sure to type this in the chat in the language of your choice. And then I'll capture that in the session summaries, add some links that you want to share, and you can find that in the Google Drive. You also have the full program, so if you want to see the past sessions, what they were about, and the upcoming ones, you can see that in the PDF program. And then we also have information about the open session on Thursday, 14th of August. For those who were not here in the past sessions, you should have received information about that in an email, but let me explain that to you quickly. So on the 14th of August, leading up to World Water Week, we will have an open session for you to present your water and communications project. So whatever story you want to talk about related to water and communications, leading up to World Water Week, a project that you really care about, that you want feedback on, collaboration, ideas, solution to challenges, feel free to submit your story in a Google form. We will share the link as well in the chat and in a follow-up email. You can submit your stories and we will select 5 of you to have a 5-minute presentations on the 14th of August. And then after that, you will be put in breakout rooms where you can share with participants who share the similar challenges, who have similar projects, who have ideas to contribute to your project. And hopefully there will be a session for peer-to-peer learning, meaningful networking, and collaboration. So share your story before the end of this program, before end of next week. And we will we will share the project and the people who are selected to do the presentations early July. Any questions about that, please email me as well. That's it for today. Well, for me, for my part, of course. I'll introduce the speakers for today. We will focus on investigative journalism. And I have the pleasure to welcome Khadija Kareem and Kehinde Ogunyale from DataFight. Khadija is a researcher and data analyst with a strong passion for data-driven storytelling. that drives social change and public accountability. She currently works at DataFight, where she leads evidence-based research and reporting on Nigeria's most pressing social economic issues, including inflation, climate change, gender equity, and public policy. Khadija has a background in economics and over 3 years of experience in data journalism and development research. She has produced numerous reports on inflation in Nigeria and supported numerous investigative and solution journalism projects. She will start today's session with an overview on how climate and environmental issues can be explored through data-informed investigative journalism. After Khadija's presentation, we'll have a more practical session to identify the value of data in storytelling, and that will be led by Kehinde. He's a skilled journalist and analyst and an academy trainer at DataFight. He uses data storytelling to hold government accountable and enhancing reports with data visualization and infographics. With over 700 journalists trained in data journalism and data visualization across Nigeria and other African countries, Kehinde also collaborates with newsrooms to establish data desks. As a passionate climate journalist, Kehinde has covered the climate crisis and solution in northern Nigeria, and he is a media fellow with the Climate Tracker, the AIJC, and others. He has participated in multiple journalism fellowships, received award nomination, and facilitated journalist trainings. His experience in conflict, business, solution journalism, and fact-checking. So welcome both of you, and the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Cecile, for the introduction. So, like Cecile mentioned, my name is Khadija Kareem. I'm a research and data analyst. I work with DataFight Nigeria, and where I lead the policy research and communications department. And DataFight is a research and data analytics company that provides media, research, and data analytics services to support the growth of the public and private sectors by collecting, transforming data into accessible format, and producing insights as well as interactive visualizations to inform decision making. And we are both based in UK and in Nigeria. So our goal at DataFight is to fill in the gap in data accessibility, especially in formats that support governance, policy analysis, and accountability work in Nigeria. So our core value at DataFight is AIR. That's AIR. AIR stands for access, insight, and resourcing. So we try to provide AIR to data needs, be it public, private data needs, and that's pretty much what we do at DataFight. And welcome once again, everyone. And my session today is going to be based on the importance of data-driven journalism in influencing decisions. So I'll be sharing my screen now. Okay, can you confirm if you can see my screen, please?
Not yet.
Okay.
We can see
All
us.
right. How about
Yes,
now?
we see it.
Okay.
Great.
So, like I mentioned, my session today is going to be based on the importance of data-driven journalism in influencing decisions. So, my session is going to be like the theoretical part. Then, Kehinde, my colleague, is going to be taking the practical session. So, first of all, I would just like us to take more of an icebreaker. I would like to take like I think like 10 or 5 answers, between 10 and 5, between 5 and 10 answers, just so we're ushered in into this session. So the icebreaker question is, if you were to tell a story about data in your community using only one number, what would it be? So everyone is free to answer the question. You can also maybe put the question in the chat box. And Sissy, would you be kind enough to help us read some of the answers out, please?
Yeah, I'll look at that. I'll copy the question in the chat box as well.
Okay, so if you were to tell a story about water in your community using only one number, what would it be?
So we have already Emily, who says she'd use the volume of treated drinking water people in the UK use each day to flush the toilet. We have life itself. I don't know how you can use a number for that, but that's interesting. Sue gives the number 2.
Okay.
Kim puts the number 5. We have 1 as
Number
well.
5. Okay. I imagine that should be maybe SDG. I'm not sure, but there's no wrong answer. They're all good attempts. Any other answers, please?
We have 10, 6.
Okay.
We have 2 of 10, 2 out of 10 for going backwards. Might be related to the SDG as well. 7, 6. Life itself is the infinite number.
Okay.
And then we have more 1s and more 6. So probably SDG 6 as well. 1 for the individualism and the self-supply.
So this question I asked is just to show us that data, no matter how small or big, actually has the power to give our story strength, credibility, and long-term influence. So, however, data isn't enough. Without journalism or storytelling, data often remains hidden, misinterpreted, or sometimes inaccessible. So, on the other hand, journalism without data also risks being emotional, speculative, or misleading. So when combined, that's data and journalism, when combined, they both produce responsible, solution-driven, and impactful storytelling, whether investigative, exploratory, fact-checking, or solution-focused. So these are the core approaches of development journalism, or journalism at its best. In this session, we are going to be our learning objectives are we are going to understand how climate and water issues intersect with journalism. We're going to identify the value of data in driving evidence-based storytelling. We're going to recognize misinformation risk in data journalism and how to mitigate them. We're also going to learn tools and techniques for transparent and ethical reporting. We're going to gain exposure to open source platforms for climate and water data and build confidence in pitching data-driven environmental stories. So let's get into it. So this is a chart that shows the intersection between data, climate change, and journalism. So, like I said, data plays a critical role in journalism because it allows journalism to reveal truths that are not always visible on the surface. So, its data helps you quantify, verify, and visualize climate trends or water challenges. So, this kind of journalism that data does, it goes beyond breaking news. It explores long-term issues like poverty, inequality, education, infrastructure, climate, and public health. And when journalists use data, they can identify patterns that might otherwise be missed. For example, a single dry season may seem like a fluke, but when you look at maybe a trend data of maybe a 20-year trend, it might show that maybe there has been declining rainfall or increasing rainfall over time. So this tells a much serious story about climate shift, agricultural vulnerability, and water access. So it's through this historical and comparative lens that journalists can expose systemic problems, yeah, like underfunded public services, lack of infrastructure, or neglected rural areas, or slow government response to environmental degradation. So data also helps in doing accountability. It helps to hold decision makers accountable, be it by statistics, by charts, or public spending, like I mentioned earlier, public spending that is not matching the needs of maybe the environment or area that is being investigated or reported. So oftentimes data is just not numbers. They are facts that push for transparency and policy actions. And there is also a very great power in using visualizations in your storytelling. So when data is turned into clear graphics, into timelines or maps, it becomes more accessible to readers. It helps public and policymakers see what the story is about. A line graph, a bar chart, a map it can look more persuasive, or it can pass the message better than you just like throwing out the numbers or just throwing out words. So visualization is also a very important part of storytelling. So in this way, data doesn't just support your story, it becomes the foundation of your story, and it gives journalists authority, the reader clarity, and the issue of visibility, whatever issue you're trying to spotlight it. So moving on, well, this is a chart on the converging crisis of climate, water, and journalism. So earlier, I mentioned the intersection between data, climate change, and journalism. So here is converging crisis between climate, water, and journalism. So this intersection, it tries to capture the reality as climate change intensifies. Its most immediate and visible effects are often felt through water. That is through floods that displace communities, through droughts that destroy crops and limit access to clean drinking water. And water has become the front line in global climate emergency. So this 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 convergent crisis, it moves beyond surface level narratives. It shows it's more focused on underlying causes, patterns, and implication. So by storytelling or journalism, you can tell groundbreaking stories in data by using maybe rainfall patterns, water scarcity maps, and infrastructure budget. So at the intersection of these three forces, climate, water, and journalism, lies the opportunity that shape how societies respond to most of the urgent challenges at hand. So when there is flood, that is like a very urgent crisis that spotlights the the effects or how bad climate change is in an area, or if there's droughts, it spotlights how bad climate change is getting or how worse things are getting in terms of climate change. So moving on, we're examining where climate, water, gender, and health intersect. So I'm just trying to show you how there is intersection between climate, water, and journalism, climate, climate, climate change, journalism and data, and now water, climate, gender, and health. So climate, water, and gender health are often treated as silos in reporting. So most times you have gender reports different, you have health reports different, but there's actually a relationship between climate, water, gender, and health. So let's take, for example, the issue of flooding. So flooding is a water problem that is caused by climate change. And if you look at the gender perspective, I think there was a flood that happened in Nigeria in 2022. Data shows that more women and children were more affected, were more displaced than men due to this flooding. That is a gender angle. And in terms of health, people were more were more exposed to different diseases. There was a lot of waterborne diseases that people got exposed to. Even different types of insects, different types of animals came to were washed off to the land. So it put people at risk too. So that is an example of where climate, water, gender, and health, where they intersect in the issue of climate change. So this is a chart that shows the intersection between climate, water, gender, and health. So moving on. Okay, so we're going to so in terms of the intersection, sorry about that. In terms of the intersection of climate, water, gender, and health, there are some framings that discusses how the intersectional Z phase, I would call it, yeah, the intersectional phase of these four sectors. So, the intersectional framing here is climate change intensifies water scarcity. That is an example. So, the example I gave earlier was the flooding that happened in Nigeria in 2022. So, here, this just tries to give a general overview of where the intersection is prevalent. So, here, climate change intensifies water scarcity, which disproportionately affect women, leading to health crises like waterborne diseases, maternal complications, and malnutrition. Women and girls bear the burden of water collection in many societies, reducing school attendance and economic participation, widening gender inequality. Health systems are vulnerable to climate shocks like floods or drought, with consequences such as, so this is just in a way related to the example I cited earlier, which speaks about how flood was able to answer the question of climate, water, gender, and health. Not necessarily a question, but seeing a climate perspective, a water perspective, a gender perspective, and a health perspective to one issue. So at the intersection of all this lies the issue, the SDGs, that's the Structural Development Goals. So for climate, that it's SDG 13 covers climate, and that's climate action. It means SDG 13 shows tackling climate change requires inclusive strategies that consider its ripple effect on water access, disease patterns, and vulnerable populations like women. So for water, SDG 6 covers water, that is access to clean water and sanitation. Water, the explanation for this is water insecurity driven by climate change affects health and imposes a burden largely on women and girls. So even from the SDGs, you can see that there's an intersection between these four sectors. And for gender, that is SDG 5. SDG 5, it covers gender equality. So the explanation for this is unequal gender roles in water collection and caregiving magnify the impact of environmental and health crisis on women. And for health, SDG 3 covers health, which is good health and well-being. And for this, climate and water stressors lead to increased disease outbreaks, maternal risk, and poor sanitation, especially in marginalized communities. So even from our structural development goals, you can see that none of these SDGs operate in silos. They are all interconnected. From the examples, from the explanation, you can see that um, through climate action, you're talking about vulnerable population, which is women. Through clean water and sanitation, you're able to it covers health, women and girls. Then gender equality, you're talking about the environmental and health risks of women that women face, and good health and well-being. You're able to talk about marginalized communities, climate, and also water-borne diseases and the rest. So we're moving on to crafting stories through numbers. So this is basically using how to effectively use the numbers that you see to craft stories. So earlier on, when I asked the question of what number would you give to tell a water crisis story in your community, some people said 5, some people said 6. So if you have the number 5, it's a data on its own, SDG 5. That is one data. Then you're able to maybe examine that. Where is our community in terms of SDG 5? What have we achieved? What is left for us to achieve? And how many years is it going to take for us to achieve SDG 5? So data doesn't just support a story, it is the story, and visualizing long-term patterns like rainfall decline or lake shrinkage can drive action, or showing a 20-year trend of declining rainfall. That's a powerful tool. So like I think I gave this instance at the beginning of the session where I said if like there's a case of rainfall, you can just go ahead and report it. But when you look at maybe the 20-year trend or 10-year trend, you're able to say there's been declining rainfall over time, or there's been increasing rainfall over time. So a practical example of this is use of satellite images to track lake chart reduction, and visualizing drought impact by mapping rainfall anomalies. So we're moving on to misinformation in the age of climate denial. So as climate change is becoming more visible and urgent, and I think in recent times, climate change is getting more attention and more people are getting more knowledgeable when it comes to climate change. We're also at the risk of climate misinformation. So this climate misinformation is often disguised as data. So you've probably seen a data that minimizes global warming, misleading statistics that downplays and using outdated data or cherry pick data. So cherry pick data here means looking at the data and using the data to tell what you want. So data is actually a powerful tool. You can use data to your advantage. So that is where bias is coming. So and it's called cherry picking your data. So misinformation doesn't just confuse, it corrupts narratives. And in development reporting, the stakes are high. A misreported poverty rate, an exaggerated climate figure, or misleading map of gender violence can shift public attention. It can affect public funding and even affect government action in responding to some of these issues, or diverting the attention of the government towards the wrong direction. So because in data journalism, trust is your currency. So for example, if you should, I'm pretty sure if I should ask like a number of us in this room, like where we go to maybe get international news. I know BBC would be part, CNN would probably be part, or Al Jazeera would be part of the examples we would be citing to get international news. So the reason we go to these outlets is due to trust. So imagine CNN or BBC or Al Jazeera one of these days just put out an information and it turns out that the information is misleading. So it kills the trust you have in it. So next time you see a news on that news outlet, you're at the back of your mind, you're You might just be like, is this correct? Can I rely on this? And sometimes misinformation is not just mistakes. Sometimes it's intentional, and it might be used to confuse maybe the public or to delay action. So sometimes to actually maybe, I think some governments actually tried to do this, correct me if I'm wrong. So maybe to mitigate the risk or to make a situation look less than it looks, or less harmful than it looks, they try to downplay the effect. So in that case, the misinformation is not a mistake. It is actually intentional to probably maybe not make people panic. But this type of actions would lead to people not prioritizing what they're supposed to prioritize, or taking measures they are supposed to protect them from some of these situations. So now more than ever, data can be weaponized. One misleading chart or wrongly statistic has the power to undermine, underestimate years of public awareness, campaigns, and scientific research. And in this climate of denial and misinformation or disinformation, journalists have a critical role to play, not just in telling stories, but in protecting the truth behind the stories. So sourcing your data and verifying your data is non-negotiable. So the role we have to play as maybe journalists or researchers or storytellers in general is to actually verify our sources, verify our data, and to prove our data, to know where is the data from, where which methodology was used, who collected the data, and is the data current? Does it reflect the current realities? So this is where veracity comes in. That is truthfulness, and this is the foundation of true and responsible journalism. And verification is how we can protect veracity. So before you publish any number, like I said earlier, you should ask some questions of where it's from, which methodology was used, what periods does it cover, and does it really reflect the current reality of things. So there are some common pitfalls that enables misinformation. One is cherry picking, and that is trying to use data to support your argument while ignoring the rest. I think I explained this earlier. So data can be used to your advantage. It can be manipulative. As good as data is, it can also be manipulative. And you'll be surprised that you would use data to suit a narrative that is not there, and it would look true. It would look true, but maybe deep down to the writer or to whoever is doing the research, you know this is not what the data is actually speaking. But sometimes we do this unknowingly, sometimes knowingly. And another thing we most people do, another pitfall is misleading visuals. So maybe where you're supposed to use bar charts, you use let's say like a pie chart. So a pie chart is just showing the distribution of data. A bar chart is supposed to show the trend of something, to know whether it's going up or going down. So wrong use of visuals, it defeats the purpose of your chart, because you're not able to tell your story through your chart. And overloading with jargon. So as I see this a lot in climate stories and climate change. Maybe there are some that they would say they're trying to do like an informative piece to inform the public, and you're adding things like Fahrenheit, you're adding things like ppm for easy understanding. That's to the common man or to the layman. You have to break down things as easy and as simple as explaining it to a 10-year-old. So overloading your articles or your stories with jargon, it's most times defeats the purpose of of you doing your stories most times, and also ignoring uncertainty. So when you see a data, you're not sure of where the data is gotten from, what methodologies were used for the data, you should actually maybe state it there, or probably try to check the data from 1, 2, 3 sources to know if the data is actually correct. So when you're not sure of something, always double check from your end so you're sure you're not spreading the wrong news. Then the next pitfall is outdated data. So the use of outdated data is also another problem, because it is not every problem that has happened in the past that still applies to today. The temperature we had like 10 years ago is not what we have at the moment. So using maybe a data of 10 years ago to show the change in temperature is like a wrong use. You're trying to spread the wrong information because it does not reflect the current reality of temperature change. So this is an example of climate reports that are misinformed and climate reports that are verified. So the first one states that global temperatures haven't risen since 1998. So someone that does not know much about climate change or change in global temperatures would easily believe this statement, especially if the person writes the article in a very inviting or nice way that makes it look as if the source is actually verifiable or is true. So but the verified climate report for this is: despite short-term fluctuations, global average temperatures have steadily risen over the past century, with 1998 being an unusually hot El Nino year. Then the next one is: the earth is cooling. This winter broke cold records. So by the time you say that, you're not capturing what is going on globally, right? And the statement itself is wrong. But like I said earlier, someone who does not know much about this subject topic can easily see this and just fly with it and think it's true. So the correct statement for this is: the verified climate report for this is: local weather events do not contradict global warming. Long-term climate data shows rising global average temperatures. And the next one is: the climate has always changed naturally. This is just another cycle. Then the verified climate report, that is the true climate report, should be: while natural cycles exist, current changes are too rapid and widespread to be explained without accounting for human emissions. And the next one is: a single cold snap disproves global warming. That's so I don't think it's a good idea to read this, so I don't bore us. But the slides will be shared. I think it will be shared soon, so we can always go through this examples of misinformed climate report and verified climate report. So we're moving on to best practices to avoid misinformation. So the first one is to always source your data from authoritative data platforms. So an example of authoritative data platform is Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. I think this has world data and is broken down in like a very easy to use way. And we have the World Meteorological Organization. And the next practice that helps you avoid misinformation is to triangulate your data. I think I mentioned this earlier when I was explaining common pitfalls that enables misinformation. So to verify to verify your data, if you're unsure of where your data is from, try not to rely on a single data set. Cross check your findings across at least 2 or 3 reliable sources to confirm accuracy and consistencies. And another best practices to understand the methodologies you're using, know how the data was collected, the sampling method, the time frame, and geographic scope and limitations. generally. So the next best practice is to make numbers digestible, not intimidating. Um, like I mentioned, you're trying to do a data, you're maybe instead of saying rainfall has reduced or declined, you're not trying to maybe give some form of okay, for example, maybe for temperature, global temperature, instead of saying that the global temperature has increased over time for the past so year, or has doubled or has tripled, then you're saying something like it has increased by degree Celsius or degree Fahrenheit. Like, it is not bad to actually present your data or your stories in this way, but you can add that part of actually putting the raw numbers. But for like the layman to understand, for a 10-year-old to be able to pick up your piece to read and understand, it is good to always break it down and make it relatable in the simplest form possible. So the next best practice is to always state that data is estimated, modeled, or incomplete. So most times, for I think temperature data or rainfall data, they make predictions. So you have to be careful rather in reporting this in reporting your data, in reporting it in a story, or writing or including it in a story. You have to be careful to show that the this rainfall figure is estimated to increase or is estimated to decline, not to actually project this figure into the current reality and state it authoritatively that it is going to happen. Then another best practice is to make sure that you're using the latest. So these practices, that are just like the opposite of common pitfalls that you use to that enables misinformation. So moving on to how to interpret climate statistics. So this method, it helps you break down your climate statistics in the best way possible, and for you to be careful to in interpreting your data, not to pass on the wrong message. So the first one is numbers are only as useful as our interpretation, and you have to be cautious and curious when you're using them. The first one is to understand the unit. You have to understand what degree Celsius mean or what degree Fahrenheit mean. So that way you're able to break it down as little as possible, to explain your data in your story the best way you can. You need to have a level of understanding yourself. So another unit is part per million for CO2 emissions. So instead of saying putting ppm in your stories, you can always add parts per million, so you're clear, and you also have to understand it on your own part. Then the next unit that is important to understand is using USD or currency of the region you're reporting for the money value of costs, spending, or losses. I think this is explanatory enough. And another method, or the best practice for interpreting climate statistics, is learn to differentiate trends from snapshots. So I think I gave an example earlier where I said rainfall. So instead of um, putting out a data on rainfall during just one period, do a trend. So when you're doing a trend, it tells you the pattern over time. Why a snapshot is just capturing a single data point or year. So using trend tells progress or deterioration, and snapshot highlights urgency. So snapshot is just telling you what is happening at the moment, not taking into cognizance what has happened in the past. So you can use that to maybe buckle up to know what would happen in the future. So another method is to use averages, that is mean, medians, and ranges. Use them wisely where you're supposed to. So mean gives a general picture but may hide extremes. So mean is just the average, and median is less affected by outliers. Ranges show the spread, and extremes. So it's in statistics, I think it's often argued that range is the best method, that's the mode, is the best method for is the best average method for calculating averages. And an example of this is average temperature might seem normal, but heat waves showing increasing extremes would be able to tell your story or show what exactly the temperature is over time or is going to be in the future. So another practice is normalizing data for fair comparison. So this means using per capita figures or percentages. So an example of this is emissions per person, rainfall per hectare of farmland, and climate finance as a percentage of total national budget, or climate finance as a percentage of total population. So an example of this climate finance is when you see maybe a certain figure that a country or a state put out to finance climate in their area or in their region, you break it down. So instead of giving the numbers, it is better to break it down to say how much is allocated per person to fight climate change or to cover climate change. So that way you're able to show the extent of progress or the extent of, I don't want to say damage, but the extent of, to examine how bad or good the situation is. So you're breaking it down. And a tip here is that raw numbers can be misleading, and normalized data improves fairness and comparability. So in terms of this, an example is for climate finance, maybe a country that has a a population of about a population of about 200 million has a climate finance budget of let's say $200 billion. So compared to another country that just has a population of 50 million people and also allocated let's say $100 million to fight climate change. So normally when you see that data, what would come to your mind at first is, oh, this the country that allocated $200 million is doing better than that other country that allocated 100 million. But when you're able to do the per capita, that's the climate finance per person, allocated per person in that country, you would realize that the country that has 50 million population with a 100 million finance budget, climate finance budget, is actually doing better than that other country. So that's just one example. Then another tip is to you have to be aware of correlation and causation. So sometimes correlation is not always equal to causation. So just because two things change at the same time doesn't mean one caused the other. An example of this is areas experiencing hotter weather also report more cholera or typhoid cases. So this shows that this means that there's a correlation. There's actually a correlation between hot weather and cholera or typhoid cases. But the hot weather is not what leads to cholera or typhoid cases. So the reality is the increase in disease may be due to overwhelmed water infrastructure, poor sanitation, or lack of clean water access, not the heat alone. And the mediator is often water quality and governance, not just temperature. So that is a practical example of two things, that is hot weather and cholera and typhoid cases happening together, but one is not the cause of the other. So we're moving on to transparency and trust. Transparency builds trust in a world where misinformation spreads fast and trust in media is declining. The how is just as important as the what, and transparent methods is equal to trustworthy reporting. So when audiences can trace how conclusions were reached, they are more likely to believe them. A good practical use of this is when journalists use open source tools and you're able to share your data sources. So for most times you would see any chat you see anywhere, they would include the source where they got it from. So this is a way to build trust, to let them, to show transparency that this is what I used. So you're able to even verify it from your own end in case there is maybe some form of doubt you're having towards that data or chat or information that chart or map or infographic is showing. So whether it's a Google Sheet or a footnote in your chat or stories or analysis, it's always good because it's built trust and it's a way of inviting the public or the audience or whoever is reading into the process. So this does two things. It shows you have nothing to hide, one, and your audience is able to see your methodology, they're able to test your assumptions and trust your integrity. So someone that is able to see your source can always come back to say, okay, I know how this person got this, I know how this person did that. So the person can always come back to that, to you, for every other information, or is able to trust every other information you put out. So the second one is it democratizes knowledge. So tools like Data Wrapper or Tableau or Flourish, they help anyone to allow anyone to build chat. So if you, for example, if you build your chat with Data Wrapper and you embed your link, and a user or your audience is able to just click on that link to get the data and use at that spot, that is you building a layer of transparency and trust. So, and inviting them to also use the data. This is what democratizing this data means. And another method of transparency and trust is ethical responsibility. Transparency is not just a best practice, it is an ethical obligation in an age of misinformation and distrust, and it helps counteract the black box problem in journalism. So the second um, point is trust as a two-way street. Journalists gain credibility, audiences gain capacity, they learn to verify and interpret data on their own. So um, we're moving on to another, that is that on transparency and trust. So that part just basically covered how transparency and trust, it represents a good ideal in good journalism, and it shows that good journalism isn't about gatekeeping, and it's about inviting people in and gaining people's trust. This also helps to counter misinformation, just like the example I gave earlier on news sources that I think everyone would want to go for, international news like the CNN, BBC, and Al Jazeera. So moving on, we're looking at changing narratives and changing outcomes. So a well-researched data story actually has the power to reshape public opinion. Not just well researched, a well-informed and true data story, it has the power to reshape public opinion. So it also can also guide donor priorities to know where needs the most urgent interventions, and it helps to also guide government agencies to know where and what exactly their focus should be on. And they they that's the power of journalism with data. That's the power of journalism data. It makes the indivisible visible, and it makes the things that appear complex, it makes it look simpler, and it makes the urgent undeniable. Yeah, I think that's clear. So in terms of policy, in terms of information, in terms of funding, data just helps you back your story up to tell these stories better. So this is the first point here on the slide shows that data is equal to narrative and is equal to policy impact. That is the policy impact that is of you trying to change the narrative. That is, you're using data to drive narrative, and its lead the outcome is having a policy impact. So policy data stories shift how people perceive problems, prioritize solutions, and allocate resources. So another point is narratives shape outcomes. Just like I mentioned earlier, the way we report water scarcity, flooding, pollution, or access don't just reflect reality, it influences it. So an example is the flood that was experienced in Nigeria in 2022. So this the I think some of the reports that came out, we can use data to they can use data to actually amplify um the period, to check the period where these floods are more prominent, and to be able to plan towards um, averting the situation from happening, or when it happens the effect would not be as much as what happened before. And journalism can also be used as an intervention. So when your story is rooted in data, it becomes a tool for advocacy, accountability, and long-term change, just like I explained earlier. And water policy is also people policy. This is bringing it down to the water context. So clear, contextual, verified reporting helps decision makers see the human side of data, who's at risk, what's needed, and where urgency lies. So for I think this is the last part, resources and next steps. I think the first step towards trying to build your narrative through data and telling good stories, good writing good articles that would lead to impact is for you to build your data toolkits. So this could be in form of websites you go to, it could be in the form of methods you use in telling the stories. In It could be like a clear method. You could have a series of steps to tell your stories. So whenever you're writing your stories, you're able to write and tell your stories in a clear and concise form. A practical example of this is at Data Fight. So at Data Fight, we over time we noticed that some stories just go with the flow. Like you just start writing a story most times without a synopsis, and at the end of the day you just end the story where the story takes you. So we came up with this method of we call it the Data Fight 7 box templates. So for this 7 box template, we're able to frame what a story should look like. So our first step most times is our news item. The second step is the node graph, that is the so what of the story, which is usually the cause or effect of a news item. And the third step is a trend over time of your news item. Then the fourth step is comparison with peers. Like, is this the whatever is happening in your news item, is it just happening alone in that region, or it applies to every other region, or it applies to the world? Then the fifth step is trying to prove your news item actually relates to your cause and effects. This is where we actually use our data to show maybe there's a correlation or it's a causation. And for step 6 is just trying to get existing knowledge. This is where expert opinion comes in. This is where data or statistics from other verifiable authorities come in. And our step 7 is the conclusion. So this way, whenever we want to write a piece, we're able to break down our steps to know, okay, after this follows. So that way we actually break the barrier of misinformation. We break the there's no form of bias in whatever we do, because we have a step that guides us, and it's just inserting your story into those steps, and you have a clear and concise story. Sometimes it helps you clear the fog you have regarding any story that or article or data you come across. And some tools and links that you might use as resources, just like I mentioned earlier, is IPCC, which is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. So, like I mentioned that this is really good for journalists, and it breaks down key climate science findings in journalist-friendly language. I think it's called the IPCC Journalist Guide, and we have the Water Risk Atlas. This is a website that has interactive maps and data on water risk, stress, scarcity, and we also have Data Fight Water and Climate Change portal. So this website, we have stories there, we have data, and our website is it's right there. So it's just climate.datafight.com. So there you can see real life examples of impactful data driven reporting of climate change stories, water stories. And I think Kehinde would be able to shed more light on how you can build your tools, on how you can build your data story kits to be able to guide your story reporting and to be able to write your stories and articles in a clear and concise form, and also in a true form without misleading the public or disinforming the public. So thank you so much. Now I would like to take questions and answer and maybe reflections from the session.
Thanks, Khadija. There were quite a few comments in the chat appreciating your your insights, and I've collected a few questions from the chat. Most of the a few of them relate to if you can explain a bit more about the methodology.
Okay.
Like when you say from a research perspective, there's how do you access data and how do you make the process of looking for data easy enough so there's not so it's efficient and doesn't require too much fact checking, and what kind of data you can trust. Can you trust student publications, for example? So it's all about basically how do you access data, especially when data is really scarce on a specific topic, and how do you trust the data and how do you make your process?
Okay, thank you so much. So for the question on how to get data and methodologies for data, that is where Kehinde's session comes in. His session would be able to answer those questions properly. But in terms of the question on whether to actually trust some data sources, especially from students or other sources that you might not trust, is to look at that is where looking at their methodology comes in. You look at for example, when you see a research, look at their sample size. If you think you can look at the data to see if the sample size actually covers or is able to tell the full picture of whatever the issue is they're trying to spotlight. So that is one method of looking at it. Looking at the methodology just helps you to understand this in general. I hope I'm able to answer that question.
I think that was pretty clear. So the sample size, the bigger the sample, the more accurate the data.
Not like bigger the sample. So, for example, maybe you want to do a research on the number of boys and girls in, let's say, the world, and you decide to use this meeting, people that attend this meeting, to judge that. That is like a wrong sample size. That is the wrong. It would give you the wrongest interpretation, the wrongest insight, or what's it called, insights basically into your data. So maybe looking at other examples of maybe meetings that happen, that is you increasing your sample size. So most times it's not always about the number, it's maybe about the coverage. I don't know if this is clear enough. It's about the coverage. It's not always about the number, it's about the coverage. That way you're looking at the geography of where the sample is from. you're looking at the attributes of the sample size.
Yeah, totally. And then there was another question before we move to Kehinde's part about how to use how do you communicate with remote communities that don't handle complex information, or they understand very well the water issues like scarcity and pollutions, but they don't necessarily have the backup information, the complex information to back it up.
Okay, so in this case, this is where your infographics come in. Not charts, not maps, just use simple infographics. It could be just like a cartoon character, or just like a bunch of circles or lines just to show. That way, I think that way you're able to break your you're able to break whatever information you're trying to give out. So I think one method I've learned over time to be able to know if my maybe chart or whatever I'm trying to do is able to communicate to the layman or to somebody that is not maybe as learned as maybe every other average person, is to maybe call a 10-year-old or someone who I know is not knowledgeable in that field to show them that what does this tell you without telling them anything. I'm just showing them that what does this tell you. So that way I'm able to test if my story or chart or whatever I'm doing would get to the right audience. And by the time it actually gets to that right audience, would they be able to understand?
I see. Well, fantastic. I think you gave us a very good overview of how we can use data and what data can be used for. So thank you for that. I don't see any more questions in the chat. If you do have more questions later on, please type them in the chat, and then we'll find a way to address them. Yeah, I guess we can move to Kehinde's part then, unless you have anything you want to wrap us up with.
No, that would be all from my end. I would hand it over. I would add the session over to Kehinde now. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Khadija.
All right. Good day, everybody. Please still confirm that you can hear me clearly.
We hear you and we see your screen. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, and thank you, Khadija, for that beautiful presentation. So, I think I'll just go. So mine is just trying to shift everything that she has been talking about and try to do a lot of maybe show you a lot of use cases, more practical. Maybe I should lay this as a foundation. A lot of things that we do with using data is more of how we can shift the narrative. So shift the narrative mean that we're moving from being an informative journalist to an analytical journalist. So how do we shift from just informing the public in the outcome of events, then use data to analyze that event? And that works in several fields. On probably we driving out insights, probably we running predictions, probably we studying the numbers and seeing how it affects other social, cultural issues. So you can easily just pick one data point. Yes, we probably studied how sea rise, the level of sea rise in a particular community, right? And you see that level, if it becomes consistent, right, it's going to lead to flooding, which essentially would lead to displacing a lot of people in that community. Now, that's just one information. So let's take a practical example. Flooding happened in a particular community, right? And every journalist is going there to see how they want to report that issue, right? And the basic of all interpretation of that particular event is flooding kills this or flooding displays that, or right? But that's just the information part of what we do as journalists. Can we move down to the analytical part where we can now pick that data points? Let's say it's about 300 persons that were displaced. How do we tell the story by just centering our focus on just that numbers, right? how can we interpret a lot of story points by analyzing the effect of flooding, right, on those 300 persons to affect every other socio-cultural issue. So it means that if people are being displaced, right, it will obviously lead to migration, which will affect wherever they are migrating to, would increase the population or increase demand in lifestyle, right? So can we begin to tell an analytical part of storytelling numbers? If 300 people are going to are being displaced by flood in an event, right? Wheresoever they are migrating to will also bring a challenge to health, right? It will also bring a challenge to household living. It will also bring a challenge to education, right? Probably they have abandoned their school. So it automatically means that the children will have to start up a new school. They have to settle down, right? What if the flooding destroyed a lot of houses and market squares and the likes, right? If these people have to come back, it automatically means that they have to start again. And if inflation goes up, right, it means that they will be spending more to settle down at their displaced community. Now, top of my head, just written one event I've already described like about 4 angles to different stories, right? A regular storyteller or a regular decision maker or policy advocate would just speak, oh, flooding displaced. If I'm a policy person, I just speak flooding displaced 300 persons in this community, right? And I begin to raise my placards or sign my petitions or write to the administrations or the government persons in charge and say, what are we doing? What are we advocating? Right? But that's the surface level of information. You applying data to it, studying the numbers will now be that how do you take their numbers and begin to break it down such that you see that the data does not exist in one sense of isolation, but one data point at least can spread out to affecting several other thematic issues. So your work as a journalist is not just to give us the information of that event, right? It's more of to tell us how that event can directly affect other thematic areas that is also connected to that data point. I don't know if you're getting it. Oh, sorry. I always like a very, very interactive class. So permit me, I'm going to be saying, I don't know if you're getting it a lot of the time, right? So, I mean, these are some of the scopes I'm going to be touching. I'm going to be very fast with this. So that would mean that if we see an event, right, questions that come to our mind is where can we find the data, right? What do we do with the data? And how do we interpret it, right? So we helped you out with data sourcing, right? We're going to be sharing a link later that you can download a lot of databases. There are a lot of databases that speaks to data sourcing, right? But analyzing it is where your work as someone who is working with data. So I don't want to assume that every one of us are data journalists, but such that even we as data journalists, analyzing is where our strong hold coming, right? To say that every interpretation that we need to do starts from the analysis that we make, right? And we'll be seeing several forms of how we can just analyze, just several forms. For interpretation level, it has to just be 2, right? Either you're storytelling it, right? Or you're visualizing it, right? So I always say to people that you can always interpret an event 2 ways, and Khadija has also made mention of it. Is that you storytell that event, right? Or you put it in pictures, charts, maps, such that it resonates with whosoever is your public, right? And this is just, I mean, I don't need to talk about this, just different type of ways that we see what's up. But let's go down to the main first step of how we interpret data trend and data sets. So number 1 is looking at trends. So I'm going to be moving around. Let's see. I'm going to try to move around. Can you see this? Can you see this spreadsheet?
Yes, we can.
All right. So let's say you have, and I used to make this joke actively 2-3 years ago when I was working in a newsroom. what my boss would do to me is give me a lot of spreadsheet like this without no context to what I'm doing, and just tell me, can you create a story out of this spreadsheet, right? The first thing I do is probably read about it. What is this spreadsheet trying to tell me, right? Oh, this spreadsheet was gotten from water conflict chronology. So I just script out this data so that to avoid, right? So automatically, this is just telling us different conflicts in different areas, right? That has been affected by water, right? Sorry, different conflicts in different areas that, I mean, where it was water that started it off. So it might be probably water scarcity or availability of water, should I say, sorry, water scarcity or inavailability of water. It might be flooding. It might just be a lot. What this particular data set is telling us, right? We might look at it and just be like, oh, this is a big map. There's a lot of water conflict in Africa than in probably other Asian countries or other Europe countries. But on a larger scale, right, you are only giving us the first-hand information to this particular data, right? So any journalist that sees this will already tell 2, 3, 4 information story, right? There's more water conflict in Africa than in the Asian countries or in the Europe countries, right? Any other person that sees this, or a policy advocate that sees this, right, to want to be like, let's run a campaign on how water is probably affecting this part of Africa, right? And see how we can get the government to demand accountability and the likes. But we are saying that you can't only reach that data set as just that informative level. Can we begin to analyze it one after the other? So if we begin to go deep to it, right, I begin to pick, probably filter by let's lose any region, right? Let's probably just do Africa, right? Let's see sub-Saharan Africa, right? Top of our head, it is, why do we have more water issues around here than here, right? A basic reason would be that this is the Pacific, right? This is Pacific and the oceans going around, right? Would be the fact that you have an influx of water settlement around that area would almost mean that there is also more issues there, right? But that's just one leg. So our first step of analysis might be, can we check the trend over time? Checking the trend does not only just tell us that this is a pattern at which this particular data has, this particular issue has been happening, but we can also use it such that we can predict that if this issue is not solved, right, there are challenges that might happen in the nearest 5 to 6 years. So this is me saying that the whole ideology of climate change, right, started because a group of persons or a group of advocates or a group of journalists or a group of CSOs or international bodies started monitoring patterns, right? Those patterns are what they used to create what they now said, okay, what is the problem, or what is the problem, or what is the solutions that we can render. So the problem is, in the next 5 years, 2030 or 2060, right, or next 10 years, right, if we don't solve this issue, this might happen to us. This might happen to us, right? The development is, how do we now begin to speak to government bodies? Can we sign a contract? All those patterns are different trends that were monitored by this group because they have observed it over time. So can we pick one data point and say, let me use Nigeria because, I mean, that's where I come from. The fact that we have these issues around this place, what are the likely chances that social community in the next 2 years will also develop this particular issue, right? Can we begin to monitor it over time? I'm going to show you a lot of practical. So let's just stay here first. So just stay with me a little bit, right? Another one might be, can we just collate it together, right, and make a lot of sense out of it? Can we find the outliers, or can we compare over time? So I scraped this data, right? Don't have the time to start teaching us data scraping right now. So, but I mean, I scraped this data so this is everything here, right? I can decide to just run a filter by conflict type. Oh, so permit me, I'm sorry. I was almost running out of power, and I was making a short prayer that the power should be restored, and it was just restored now. Right? So can we take this when I see shit like that, I begin to okay, so like I said, I script this already, right? So all these parts are probably unnecessary. Probably go to the conflict type and let's see the analysis. So they're telling me that 4 major ways they have analyzed conflict over time is either by causes, casualties, triggers, weapon, and conflict types, right? And triggers and weapons, or weapons, right? I can decide to just clear everything, and let's see, I'm filtering this by, let's just pick a random one. Let's see by weapons, right? And probably decide to just say, in just, let's do the sub-Saharan, right? And I decide to just make a pivot out of this, such that I can just highlight everything here and just say, create a new pivot table for me, right? What I want to understand here is just how do I monitor trend or monitor anything. So drag, this is conflict type, right? Drag it to rows, right? Then probably drag the same conflict type because I want to monitor the pattern, right? Or okay, let's just drag this to value, right? So what I've just done here is just saying that in how many countries, by definition, is just how many sorry, what did I drag? Okay, region. In how many regions had more issues on which particular types of conflicts, right? You will see that more records were on this, more records were on this, and more records were on this. So I'm saying, can we pick these 3 data points and just say that, and make sure that our storytelling revolves around these 3 issues, such that when we are creating a campaign or creating a story or creating a pitch, right? Because we have understood the data pattern, right? We already know where our concerns is targeted to. I don't know if you get, oh, I said I was not going to use that word, right? These are our focal points, triggers, and please, Cecile, because this is practical, so if there are anybody asking questions, I'm seeing like a notification. So if there are anybody asking questions, you can just help me.
There's been a few questions in the chat. We are really running out of time though. So
yes. Okay. So
yeah,
and
if I don't know if you want to address the questions or
okay,
if
let's
you
just pick one so that just helps me to. I mean, let's just pick one. Just any random one can help us.
So Ikechukwu asks, as journalists, it remains fundamental for okay. Ikechukwu, I don't know if you want to ask your question yourself, if you can keep it really, really short.
Maybe I can come in there and say his question is basically around organizations that can help maybe undergraduates or different groups of people to understand data mining in marginalized communities.
Okay. So so I think the first answer to it is going to be what issues first matters to those communities first. Before you can now start looking at the issue. Let me tell you how I do mine, right? And this is going to speak again to a question that someone asked to Khadija. Sometimes if I'm working on a particular issue, and I don't find the data to that for that issue, especially to that particular community, I look for two interrelated points that can also help me. So a good instance is I want to report flooding in so community. I can't find the number of people that have been affected by flooding in that community, right? There's no institution keeping that data point. The community is quite very large. I can't speak to it. One of the things I can do is I know that flooding, if there's flooding, is going to cause some health issues like malaria or cholera, right? If there's flooding, it's going to also cause issues like migration and displacement. I look for those data points, right? Use that as an aggregate to say, okay, if there's an increase in patterns of malaria over time, are you getting that?
Yeah,
Or if
there
there's an
was
issue
another
of,
related questions to that actually
okay,
about how do you find those sources? How do you
yeah.
know if you trust, like if you can trust the data source?
So we're going to give you this link, right? A lot of you are going to have access to this. This is just us collating over 70 database on different issues. So Cecile can probably help us share it out, right?
Yeah.
This is also us collating a lot of database on several issues. So at least we verified these ones, right? This can help you leverage to the next one that you're doing, right? So like I was saying, if you have two issues that speak to the, so if I don't find flooding, what I do is, okay, can I speak to health? Can I check an health related issue? Can I check a migration related issue? That answers the questions for me. So if I see over time, within the space of that month, in 1 year, I've seen, oh, there have been increased migration in this community. There have been increased malaria or increased cholera or typhoid in this community, which is also affected by flooding, right? I just pick those two and use that to answer that, okay, fine, we can't get the data of people who were displaced by flood or people that were affected by flood, but we knew flooding happened, right? So another thing we can just do is just take that flooding issue and say, flooding is a result of, when flooding happens, obviously, people migrate, right? Migration data already shows this, right? That answers our question. When flooding happens, it also brings some health issues, right? These health issues on this helps us answer our data, right? So let me try to wrap up in just 5 minutes because we can't teach a lot. I wish we had a lot of time for the practicals, but we can't teach a lot, right? So such that I was saying here that such that our key focus right now would be on these issues. Why? Because we already see from the data points that, okay, these are the major issues that are causing conflict in this particular area. So I might now want to start filtering them over time to now say, okay, what community is probably the highest? What community is probably the lowest, right? Now, that does not really mean that we can't also report something around this, right? I can decide to begin to pick them and begin to observe. And that's where our outliers or our comparison comes in, is that why if everybody is already focusing on this, at the time I had reported an issue where everybody was just centering on this because it was so obvious, right? There was a particular funding for a particular community that was supposed to be, sorry, for a particular state that was supposed to be given, that was not given, right? To solve an ecological issue. Everybody, all the newsrooms started focusing on that. That, oh, it's because this fund was not released, or sorry, the fund was released, but they didn't use it judiciously. That's why they had.
Okay, I'm sorry, we'll have to cut you off because we're really at time now. So if you can wrap us up in like 30 seconds, and then we'll
Okay.
have to wrap up the session for today.
So, I mean, you really can always probably just study this. One of the things that we do also at the academy is how we can is how we also resource a lot of people around this issue. So we have a video that we have done around this. I can promise you that we can probably have this class some other time and create something like this, and you just understand how we probably use several of these formulas to narrate our storytelling. There's almost a lot I can't probably tell you right now, but then I think this is just like the crux of what I'm going to do. Download the data set. Is a downloadable link. You can always use that to check every database, and I think that can just give you a surface level to everything. Let's hope that we get to meet again. There's a lot of practicals that we can do on data management. Let me just drop that notes on this. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for this very quick presentation. I'm sorry we didn't have so much time for practical and question and answers, but I really appreciate you, Kehinde, and Khadija's insight on data and how to use data, what to really learn from data. So I hope you I'm just up. Yeah. So yeah, just wanted to wrap us up. Thank you, Kehinde. Thank you, Khadija. Thank you all for your attention. Thank you, Grundfos Foundation, for making this program possible. I want to remind you all that next week is the last week of Water in Communications before our optional session in August. Next week we'll have a panel with a person from Coca-Cola and a farmer from Peru, and that would be facilitated by Paula Hernandez, who's Young Scientific Program Committee of World Water Week, and she's based in Mexico. So it promises to be a very interesting discussion. And the last session of the program will be with Max Boykov about how to use comedy in climate communications to drive action. So I really hope to see you next week, same link, same time. And if you have any questions, all the presentations are already in the Google Drive from today's presentations. Recordings will be uploaded next week, and we'll share more information about August 14th session. Thank you all, and we really look forward to your feedback on this session. Thanks, and have a good rest of your day.
Next words, careful. What?